Welcome to February's Coastal Gardener. We've had a relatively mild winter, and one thing you'll notice is that there's some trees blooming that you might not expect. Japanese flowering apricots are blooming at the Arboretum. You might want to check them out. Got some large double white ones, some pink ones, some almost red ones, and even a hybrid that you might want to check out in the garden. But even this time of year, lots of things going on in the garden here in southeastern North Carolina. Lots of things to talk about here on the show today. Later on, we're going to show you how to prune some things, one of those things that really is tough for a lot of people in the garden. Chantel will be in the kitchen, but first we have Leslie Wilson, who's our 4-H agent here in New Hanover County. And Leslie, welcome to the Coastal Gardener. Tell us a little bit about what you do as part of 4-H and what 4-H does.
Well, 4-H is a program that is offered through our land-grant universities, NC State and NC A&T. And it's offered to children ages 5 to 18 to learn life skills, leadership skills, and citizenship. And 4-H is offered through the counties, through camps, clubs, after-school programs, and in-school programs.
You know, a lot of people, when they think 4-H, they probably think of a very traditional view of it, you know, showing animals at the county fair, the state fair, doing those kind of things. What does 4-H do in a pretty much an urban county like New Hanover?
Well, 4-H did get its starts or its roots with county fairs and showing livestock, and we've really been able to evolve into a program that really just takes whatever a child might be interested in and teach them the skills that they need to really be a good citizen and be successful in life.
And you do some pretty cool stuff too, you know, science and technology, robotics, and all kinds of cool stuff that kids are interested in now. But of course, we still do the traditional stuff in some of the other counties too. Well, speaking of specifics of what you're doing, you've got something related to gardening. This is a garden show. We should have something about gardening. Tell us a little bit about what you got going on.
Well, this spring we'll be offering a 3-month gardening class to homeschool youth on Tuesday mornings here at the Arboretum. And that'll start on March 5th from 9:30 to 11:30 a.m. And this class is really just a way to teach kids not only basic gardening skills, but also about the environment and habitats that we have in our community and how they can be good stewards to take care of the environment. It's a really hands-on class, and so they're going to interact with the other students in the class, and it's also an integrated curriculum, so they're going to learn about math and science and language arts and social studies. And another cool thing is we'll be taking field trips to local parks to observe wildlife in different habitats, and they'll also get a chance to do a community service project.
Okay, so it's not just gardening here at the Arboretum, it's more integrated into the whole science and math and technology curriculum. You know? So, okay, so tell us exactly the timing again on it and what they have to do to sign up.
Well, the class will be offered on Tuesday mornings here at the Arboretum from 9:30 to 11:30 a.m. and that'll start on Tuesday, March 5th and run through the end of May. And to register, you can request a packet from the Cooperative Extension Office, or you can go online and print it yourself from the New Hanover County Cooperative Extension website, or find New Hanover County 4-H on Facebook, and we also have it posted there. And so you just bring that registration packet with a $50 fee to the Cooperative Extension Office or mail it to us, and you'll be signed up. One of the other cool things though is that the class is offered to any 3rd, 4th, or 5th grader. You don't have to be a current member of 4-H to be involved, and this might be a great way to become involved in the 4-H program.
Great. Well, thanks Leslie for bringing us some great news about what's going on in 4-H here in New Hanover County. That's Leslie Wilson, our 4-H agent here. And speaking of things going on in New Hanover County, we got a great opportunity for you to come to a pruning workshop, one of those things a lot of people struggle with. That'll be coming up on March 2nd at 10 a.m. That's a Saturday. There's no fee, but you do need to call and register, so check the number out at the bottom of the screen, or you can find us on Facebook at New Hanover County Arboretum and also on our website with the Cooperative Extension Service. Stick with us. Coming up after the break, we'll show you a few things you'll get more in-depth knowledge on March 2nd's pruning workshop.
Mark your calendars for the annual Peak of Spring as the New Hanover County Arboretum and Friends of the Arboretum present the 2013 Wilmington Garden Show. This year's event has a whole new look featuring a complete indoor garden created especially for the show. Over 40 vendors will help you plan for your backyard landscape. Informative talks about a wide range of subjects also highlight this year's event. And don't forget to pick up your chance to win this outdoor grill valued at $2,000. Proceeds from the event help support programming at the Arboretum.
Welcome back to the show. You know, pruning is that time of year. February is our big month for a lot of pruning, a lot of our evergreens, the crepe myrtles and all of that. And so many questions about what we do with pruning and so many really poorly done things. Unfortunately, a lot of what you see done in landscapes, not really what we'd like to see you do. So let's talk a little bit about some of the specific reasons that we would prune to begin with. You think about it, you think, yeah, the reason to prune is because it's too large. And that is a legitimate reason to prune. But one thing you may want to think about is if you're pruning a plant year after year after year because it's consistently overgrowing its site, you may want to seriously consider removing that plant and replacing it with something that's not going to grow so large. The other reasons we prune, especially on shade trees and when they're young, is to make sure that we have good structure for those plants. We don't want a lot of crossing limbs. We don't want limbs that are really tight together that are going to grow and start pushing later on, creating problems. The other main reason we do pruning is to influence flowers or fruit. Now, a lot of that depends on which plant you're talking about. Fruit trees, obviously, that's one. Grapevines, blueberries, all of those are part of that. But some of the ones, even like crepe myrtles, we prune them for a reason to try to get really good flowering. So main reasons to prune: control the size, but think about the plant, whether it's structurally strong and going to be a good plant long term, and flowers and fruit. So those are our good reasons for pruning. Once you've figured out a good reason to do it, you may want to think about the tools to use to make that happen. The main tool you need is a really good pair of hand pruners. Now, when we're talking about woody plants, shrubs and trees like that, we want bypass action pruners. They also make anvil pruners, but a really good pair of hand pruners with a bypass action, it's kind of like a pair of scissors, is going to be your best choice. If you're going to buy these for yourself, go ahead and get the good stuff. You know, you're going to pay $50 to $75 for a really good pair of pruners, but if you do that and you take care of them, they'll last you probably the rest of your life if you do a good job of taking care of them. These are Felcos, they're Swiss made, no magic to that, but they are very good products. And they do have replaceable blades, replaceable springs, a lot of things that you can rebuild them. Now, once you've gotten past the hand pruners, and usually things less than a half an inch in diameter is what we do, we'll go to something with a little more leverage, same kind of cutting action we call a lopper. Now, this is a fairly short lopper. You can get some that have much longer handles with much more leverage, but loppers would be the things that you would go from maybe an inch and a half down. And the last tool you're going to need is a good saw, and these are specifically made to cut and prune. You see, this is a folding style, a tapering to a point, really aggressive teeth. They cut on the pull rather than the push, and you'll notice that these work much better for green wood than something like a saw that's used to cut a board that you might do in a building project. So the hand pruners, the loppers, and the saw, really all you need to do a good pruning job. Now, you may notice that there's one tool that I didn't mention, and that's hedge trimmers. A lot of you like using hedge trimmers, gasoline, electric powered. They're fast, makes a lot of noise, it's fun. But unless you have a formal hedge with the geometry of that, you really shouldn't be depending on them for your major pruning or the basics of pruning. Hand pruners, loppers, and saws are what you need. One of the things we talk a lot about when we do pruning workshops is when to do it. I mentioned earlier that this is a good time to do a lot of pruning. If you're talking about evergreens like these boxwoods, ligustrums, this is the great time to do it. Late winter, early spring is when we want to do that before we get a flush. If you have plants that bloom in the summer like crepe myrtle, rose of Sharon, gardenia, we're pruning those this time of year. What you don't want to prune now are the things that are going to bloom here in the next couple of months. The azaleas, the hydrangeas, those are the ones that set flower buds on last year's wood. Prune them now won't ruin the plant, but you will remove the flower buds. So wait until after flowering for most of those. So what we're going to start with, though, are these boxwoods. Now, you think about growing boxwoods, a lot of them don't do well here in southeastern North Carolina, but these are doing pretty well. And this is a relatively formal plant, you know, but even with a relatively formal plant, we're not going to come in here with just a bunch of head shears and just turn it into a little ball. A couple of things to keep in mind with any evergreen shrub that's growing out like this in a landscape. One of the things that'll happen is that this part of the plant will get wider right here than down here. And you want to, when you're doing your pruning on a plant like this, we're always working this in a little bit so that it doesn't shade this part out and you lose the foliage down here. We want to keep that foliage there so it looks good, doesn't get leggy. So what I'm going to do with this boxwood is I'm going to go through it and I'm going to do thinning out cuts into some of these that are a little out of character. I'm going to go into the canopy with the hand shears or hand pruners and remove all of these. And what we'll do is we'll reduce the size a little bit. We'll take out some of these out of character shoots. But when we get finished, it's not going to look like a little ball. It's going to look like a plant with a natural habit. It's just going to be smaller and more in the shape that we think it should be. Okay, so you see, you might look at that and you think, well, you know, that boxwood really doesn't look that much different than it did before. That's really what we want. We brought those edges in, we reduced the size a little bit, we thinned it out. Your neighbors really shouldn't be able to tell you pruned your evergreen shrub in front of your house if you're doing it right. Relatively formal plant here in the boxwood though, but how about something a little less formal? We have Japanese ligustrum that are done tree form here at the Arboretum, and they need a little shaping up. As you can see, kind of a few wild hairs, some shoots that don't look quite right. So let's go take a look at those and see what we're going to do with this ligustrum or privet. You see these have, this is Japanese ligustrum, or this is one called recurvifolium. It's got the nice little curvy foliage there that kind of twists a little bit. This is a relatively easy plant to grow, and this is one way to grow them as a multi-stem kind of tree form thing. But you can see shoots like these that have kind of gotten out of character with the plant. Again, not as formal a plant as the boxwood, and we don't want to come in here with just head shears and just shorten them all down and turn them into a little ball. That's the way most guys do it, but that's really not the accepted way to do it. So what we're going to do, same kind of thought process, is we don't like some of these shoots like this. We're going to find that limb, we're going to follow it down into the canopy, and we're going to clip it out. We're going to go all over the canopy doing that and just thin it out a little bit and leave it the form it always has. You want that natural form so it won't look like a little geometric ball, but it'll be a little bit smaller and it won't have quite as all of these what I call wild hairs. So let's see if we can shape this ligustrum up. You can see that a little bit of different kind of approach to the ligustrum than the boxwood, but a lot of the same kind of things, thinning out, narrowing the edges of the canopy, opening the canopy up, reducing the size, and hopefully we end up with a plant that doesn't look like it's been turned into a little meatball, but actually looks like it's supposed to just not quite as large and not quite as wild in the landscape. One of the plants that everybody asks questions about is crepe myrtle. So let's go over and take a look at what we should be doing with crepe myrtle this time of year. Crepe myrtles are one of those plants that we really do a poor job of pruning here in southeastern North Carolina. A lot of people just go in and you'll see them make 5 or 6 cuts on a plant like this Choctaw here and stub it back to these things that just don't look anything like a plant's supposed to look. And we really don't want you to do that kind of pruning. If you're having to constantly butcher that plant back like that just because it grows too large, you really need to take it out and choose varieties, because you can grow crepe myrtles that might stay 3 or 4 feet all the way up to something 40, 45 feet tall, lots of things in between. But let's look a little bit at these Choctaws. Now this is a little bit different than your typical crepe myrtle. This is grown in the nursery business. We would call this a standard. It's a single trunk. And a lot of times crepe myrtle is grown this way by nurserymen so they can be used as street trees. And that works very well because they're tough plants and they tolerate those kind of conditions pretty well. We're using these in a relatively formal garden here in the tribute garden at the Arboretum. And so this is a little bit different than what we might normally think about growing crepe myrtle. But you see, we have 4 plants that are repeated in this garden, and we want them, because of the symmetrical balance of a formal garden, we kind of want them all to be the same. Now that doesn't mean we're going to turn them into little balls like lollipop trees, but we do want them to be very similar. But one thing you'll notice, 2 of these plants have been pruned some, 2 of them haven't been pruned hardly at all. You look at this one, you see a lot of growth growing through the canopy, plants rubbing, what we call fiddler limbs, injuring each other that way, blocking sunlight so you don't get good sunlight into there and get good flower buds set. So all we're going to do with these plants, the basic structure's not bad, we just want to open the canopy up. So that's really all we're going to do. Now some people say, should I remove the seed pods? They will bloom just fine whether you remove the seed pods or not. But if you have a small plant, you really don't like the way those seed pods look, nothing wrong with that. Any of this really small twiggy growth like this, that's say less than the size of a number 2 pencil, not going to support a lot of good new growth that's going to have good flowers on it anyway. But again, you don't have to remove that. These plants will bloom just fine as long as they're putting out vigorous new growth. What crepe myrtles need to bloom? Lots of new growth, lots of sun. So if you look over at some of these others that have been pruned a little bit, you'll see old wounds where we've removed interior limbs, just like we're talking about doing with this. So that's all we're going to do with these Choctaws. The basic structure is set, thin them out a little bit, make sure they're going to look as consistent as possible in this formal garden. Now, pruning a crepe myrtle this size is a fairly involved process. It's going to take a little bit of time, so we're not going to do the whole job right now, but let's show you some of the basic kinds of cuts with those saws, with the loppers that we might do to get this job started. You see we got a pretty good start on this Choctaw, thinning it out. We're going to keep working that, taking some of that little twiggy growth out. But again, it does take a little bit of time to get that done. The good news is, as you move further and further, as these plants get older and older, you won't have to do hardly anything to them, just leave them alone. If you want to see more of what it looks like, you come on over here to this plant. This plant was pruned, about this time last year. This plant was thinned out just like we started on this one. And you can see that the canopy is much more open. We don't have all of that growth that's all over top of each other, the fiddler limbs. We haven't done anything to it as far as taking the seed pods off, taking some of the twiggy growth out. Certainly wouldn't be a bad thing to do. It's just not required to get them to bloom. Again, new growth and plenty of sun is what you need for a crepe myrtle. Now, when you start with new plants, whether they're crepe myrtles, shade trees, whatever they are, especially with the shade trees, setting the basic structure of what that plant's going to look like is very important. So let's go take a look at a small crepe myrtle that we really need to do some work on right now so that 10 years from now we'll have a great plant. When you talk about these young plants like these crepe myrtles, you see this is a relatively new plant. Lots and lots of stems, too many stems really. And when you're talking about plants like this, shade trees, oaks, maples, things like that, you really have to set the structure when they're at this age. If you let this plant stay like this 2 or 3 years, you're not going to be able to fix all of that bad structure. So it's a very important time in this plant's life. The question becomes though, what do I take off? And that is a really tough question to answer sometimes. I'll tell you how I do it. When I look at this plant, I look at it and I kind of visualize it in quadrants. And if I have I'm going to look at the stems that are the most vigorous, the ones that are spaced in the right place. And when I've figured out if I've got one like this one that's growing out of this quadrant over here and growing over into this one, that's probably going to be a candidate for removal. If I have main stems that are jammed right together, whereas when they get larger and larger, they're going to start pushing against each other, I'm going to remove one of those. We're going to take out growth that's growing back through the canopy the wrong direction, just like we did on the older plant. But that's kind of the thought process is visualize this plant down the road with much larger stems. Those stems have to have some space. They have to have that sunlight to move in there. So thinning it out, setting the basic structure, what we're going to do with this plant. You can see some of these decisions are pretty tough to make, certainly not an ideal situation. We've ended up with what you see as 5 stems. We have 2 that are much older than these vigorous ones here, and we'll probably end up removing one of these before it's over with. Well, one of the things about pruning stuff is that you can always come back and do more, but once you've cut it off, you can't change it, just like cutting hair, I guess. But it's certainly not an ideal situation. The other thing to think about, you see where all these cuts have been made, you're going to get little shoots developing as it starts to grow in the spring. And you really want to rub those off so you can rub the axillary or lateral bud out so it won't keep sprouting. So when you see all of that little growth popping in there, just take your thumb when it's nice and